Welcome to your storytelling. Enjoy the stories, and don't forget to subscribe. I always thought my husband was a good man. From the moment we met, he had that charm that made everyone adore him. He was selfless, always helping others, and the way he talked about giving back to the community made me fall in love with him even more. He started a charity a few years into our marriage, and at first, it seemed like the perfect way for him to combine his passion for helping others with his entrepreneurial spirit. We hosted fundraising events, collected donations, and even had volunteers rally behind us. He was constantly praised for the work he was doing, and I was proud of him. But one day, something changed. It was a small, seemingly insignificant event, but it stuck with me. I had made a small donation to the charity, a gesture to show my support for his cause. As I sat at my desk the next day, working, I received an email confirmation of the donation. The name of the charity looked normal, but the sender's name didn't. It wasn't from the usual administrative accounts that ran the day-to-day of the charity. It came from a private email address. Odd, I thought, but shrugged it off at the time. As the weeks passed, I noticed other strange things. He was spending more time away from home, handling charity business, he said. But his phone was always locked, and he became more secretive about his dealings. At night, he would be on the phone in another room, speaking in hushed tones. When I would ask who he was talking to, he would simply smile and say it was work, but something in his voice didn't sound right. I started to feel that maybe there was more to this charity than I had ever imagined. The thought nagged at me, but I pushed it away, convincing myself that I was just being paranoid. But deep down, a tiny seed of doubt was planted. I started paying more attention to the charity's financial reports and noticed discrepancies in the numbers. The donation amounts didn't add up. That was when I realized something was wrong, but I couldn't bring myself to face it yet. I had to know the truth. The turning point came when I made another donation, this time larger than the last. I wanted to feel more involved, show my husband that I supported him wholeheartedly. After all, I was still convinced that his intentions were pure. A couple of days later, I checked my bank account and noticed that the amount had been deducted from our shared account, but the confirmation email I received this time seemed off. It wasn't as polished as the previous ones, and it lacked some of the professional touches that the charity usually had. The email simply read, "Thank you for your donation to charity name," followed by a generic message about how the donation would help their ongoing efforts. Something in my gut told me to investigate further. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but my intuition was screaming that something was wrong. I logged into the charity's website to find a list of their recent donations and was shocked at what I saw. The names of the donors were mostly unfamiliar, but more importantly, none of the amounts aligned with the donation records I had. A sinking feeling settled in my stomach. How could this be happening? My husband, the man I had married, the man who seemed so sincere, was involved in something that didn't feel right at all. That night, I confronted him. I sat him down and, with a trembling voice, asked him about the discrepancies I had found. At first, he seemed caught off guard. But then, as he realized I was serious, his tone shifted. He assured me it was a simple mistake. "You know how these things go," he said, his face calm but his eyes darting around nervously. "We've been so busy with the charity's work lately. I'll have someone look into it. Don't worry about it." But it wasn't just the financials. I started to notice other signs. He was getting more defensive when I asked about certain events or people connected to the charity. The more I tried to dig, the more he pushed me away. That's when I knew I had to take matters into my own hands. Something told me that there was more at play than I could have ever imagined. The next few days were a blur of confusion and suspicion. My mind raced with questions. How could I have been so blind? Was he truly the man I thought he was? Or was this charity just a smokescreen for something darker? I couldn't sit idle any longer. I had to find out what was really going on, and I needed to do it on my own. I started digging into the charity's financial records, even though it felt like I was intruding. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was on the edge of uncovering something huge. I reached out to a few contacts who worked with nonprofits and charities. Through them, I learned that this particular charity wasn't as well known as my husband had led me to believe. Its financials were questionable, and the donations that were being funneled through it didn't seem to be going to the places they were supposed to. The more I uncovered, the the more it seemed that the charity's operations were nothing more than a cover for something much more sinister. A week later, I found out that a large sum of money had been transferred to an overseas account linked to one of my husband's old associates, someone I had never heard of. The money wasn't being used for the charity, that much was clear. It was a diversion, a way to hide the truth. I felt like I was in a nightmare. The more pieces of the puzzle I put together, the more the picture became clear. My husband was running a scam, using the charity as a front for something much bigger. He had taken donations from people who trusted him, from those who believed in the cause, and had used that money for his own personal gain. I didn't know what to do next. Should I confront him again? Or should I gather more evidence first? My world was crumbling around me, and I wasn't sure how to stop it. The truth started to unfold at a rapid pace. I couldn't sleep, couldn't focus on anything but the charity and my husband's involvement in it. It was as if I had uncovered a web of lies so tangled, I didn't know where to begin unraveling it. Every new piece of information made my heart sink further, and every time I looked at my husband, I saw him differently. He wasn't the man I had married. He wasn't the compassionate, generous man who had promised to change the world. He was a liar, a fraud, and a manipulator. I started to trace the money further. I found more shell accounts, more hidden transactions. Each one led me closer to the conclusion I had been dreading. My husband wasn't just mismanaging the charity. He was using it to fund a lavish lifestyle, one that included expensive vacations, luxury cars, and countless private shopping sprees. I was horrified by the realization that I had been living in the dark for so long. He had used my trust, my love, and the donations of countless people to fuel his own greed. I tried to confront him again, but he was more evasive than ever. He had become a master at deflecting questions and avoiding the truth. But I couldn't let this go. I couldn't let him get away with destroying the lives of so many people. I made a decision. I had to take action. It wasn't enough to confront him privately. He needed to be held accountable for what he had done. But how could I do that without ruining everything? Without destroying my family, my reputation, and my own heart? The more I uncovered, the more it became clear that my husband wasn't just hiding small misdeeds. This was bigger than I could have ever imagined. I started talking to people who had donated to the charity, people who had been affected by its promises, and all of them had similar stories. They had all been misled, tricked into thinking their money was going toward a good cause. In truth, it was funding my husband's extravagant life, a life built on lies and deceit. I felt sick to my stomach as I realized the full extent of his actions. But there was no going back now. The weight of the truth was suffocating. I knew I had to expose him, but I didn't know how. I couldn't go to the authorities without risking everything, without exposing myself in the process. I had to be strategic. I had to gather evidence, airtight proof that no one could deny. I spent sleepless nights poring over documents, cross-referencing receipts, bank statements, and emails. The evidence was mounting, and I knew I was getting closer to the breaking point. I even started talking to journalists, people who could help expose him on a larger scale. I was terrified, but at the same time, I was determined. I couldn't let him keep doing this, couldn't let him continue to hide behind the charity while ruining lives. He had to face the consequences of his actions, no matter how much it broke my heart. The day came when I had enough evidence to take him down. I couldn't keep living this double life. I had to make the decision. Expose him and destroy everything we had built, or stay silent and live with the guilt forever. The weight of that choice was unbearable, but I knew there was only one way forward. The truth had to come out, no matter the cost. The day I decided to expose my husband's scam felt surreal. I had everything I needed: the financial records, the emails, the testimonies from people who had been deceived. But there was one huge obstacle: him. How could I go to the authorities without putting myself in danger? What if he retaliated, not just against me, but against the people who were helping me? I was consumed by the thought of what could happen next. I reached out to a journalist who had experience with exposing fraud, someone who had been through similar cases. I needed someone who could protect me, someone who could ensure the truth got out without me becoming a target. After several meetings and long discussions, we came up with a plan. I would anonymously provide the journalist with the evidence, and they would publish the story. The only problem was that my husband still had no idea I was onto him. I had to keep pretending that everything was normal, that I still believed in his charity, in his mission. That night, I couldn't sleep. The fear gnawed at me, but so did a deep sense of relief. I was finally doing something about the nightmare I had been living for so long. My heart raced with every passing minute, as if I were waiting for a bomb to explode. But I also knew it was the right thing to do. It had to be. How could I look at myself in the mirror knowing what he had done? How could I live with the knowledge that I had been complicit in his lies, just by standing by him and remaining silent? When the article was finally published, I was both terrified and exhilarated. The truth was out in the world for everyone to see. The charity was exposed for what it really was, a front for money laundering, a way to funnel donations into his own pockets. The reaction was swift. The media went wild, and people were outraged. The charity's reputation was in tatters, and the authorities began their investigation. But amidst all the chaos, there was still a part of me that felt guilty, even though I knew deep down that I had done the right thing. I expected a confrontation, but not like this. When my husband found out, it was like watching a completely different person emerge. The charming man I had married vanished, and in his place was a cold, calculating stranger. His anger was palpable, and the betrayal in his eyes was something I had never seen before. He was furious that I had gone behind his back, that I had exposed him for the world to see. "Why would you do this?" he yelled. "Do you have any idea what you've just destroyed? You've ruined everything. We had a good thing going. We could have been rich beyond our wildest dreams." His words felt like a slap to the face. I couldn't believe how easily he dismissed the harm he had caused, how little remorse he seemed to feel. He wasn't sorry for using people's trust and hard-earned money to fund his luxurious life. No, he was angry because his secret was out, and he was about to lose everything. "I thought you were a good person," I said quietly, my voice trembling. "I thought you were helping people. But all this time, you've been lying to everyone, using them. You're a fraud, and I can't live with that anymore." His eyes darkened, and for a moment, I saw a flash of something darker. But just as quickly, he regained his composure. "You don't understand," he said. "I was doing this for us. For our future." "For our future?" I repeated, disbelief lacing my words. "You were using other people's money for your own selfish gain. You're a criminal, and you're going to pay for this." He didn't say another word. Instead, he stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind him. I stood there, my heart pounding in my chest, feeling a strange mixture of relief and guilt. The truth was finally out, but the cost was greater than I had ever imagined. In the days that followed, everything changed. The charity was officially shut down, and the media continued to report on the scandal. My husband's past came to light, including his criminal activities and the way he had manipulated everyone around him, including me. The authorities started investigating the money laundering operation that had been going on for years. As the story grew, more victims came forward, people who had donated to the charity, people who had trusted him, and people who had been hurt by his actions. I was terrified of what would happen next. The media pressure was intense, and I felt like I was under constant scrutiny. My phone rang off the hook with reporters, and people from my past reached out, expressing sympathy or disbelief. Some wanted to blame me for not knowing, others were supportive, but it didn't matter. I couldn't escape the reality of the situation. I had been married to a man who had destroyed so many lives, and I couldn't undo that. But there was also something freeing about the truth coming to light. For the first time, I felt like I was no longer complicit in his lies. I had exposed the truth, and now the world could see him for what he really was. The hardest part was facing the consequences of my actions. I had torn my marriage apart, and while I knew I had done the right thing, it didn't make it any easier. I was left with a broken heart, a shattered family, and a future I never could have predicted. But I also knew that this was the only way forward. I had to heal, I had to rebuild, and I had to find a way to move on from the man I had once loved. As the investigation deepened, I was forced to relive every moment of our life together. Every lie, every manipulation, every subtle sign that I had missed. Everything came flooding back. I couldn't help but ask myself, how had I been so blind? How had I not seen the signs? But the truth was, I had wanted to believe in him. I had wanted to believe that the man I had married was a good person, that he was doing good in the world. But now, the truth was clear. He had been living a double life. Behind the facade of charity and goodwill was a man who was willing to sacrifice everything, his morals, his integrity, and the trust of those who loved him, for his own selfish gain. It was hard to accept that I had been part of that lie for so long. The guilt was overwhelming, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I should have known. But then I remembered the conversations we had, the promises he made, the life we built together. I had trusted him, and in the end, he had betrayed that trust in the most cruel and heartless way. I knew that I would never be the same again. My heart was broken, my trust in people shattered. But there was one thing I knew for certain. I couldn't keep living in the past. I had to find a way to move forward, to heal from the damage he had caused. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but I was determined to find peace, even if it meant facing the truth that my marriage had been built on lies. The trial was long, grueling, and emotionally draining. Every day, I was forced to face the man I had once loved, the man who had broken my heart and shattered my world. The courtroom was filled with witnesses, victims, and journalists, all eager to hear the details of his crimes. I had to testify, and though it felt like I was reliving my worst nightmare, I knew it was the only way to ensure that he would face the consequences of his actions. The verdict came months later, guilty on all counts. The sentence was severe, and while it offered some sense of justice, it didn't bring me the closure I had hoped for. I wasn't sure what I had expected from all of this. It wasn't just about the money, or the lies, or the way he had manipulated everyone around him. It was about the loss of the person I thought I knew, the person I had given my heart to. But as I left the courthouse that day, I felt a strange sense of relief. It wasn't a victory, not by any means, but it was the end of a chapter. I had faced the truth, and though the scars would never completely heal, I could finally start to rebuild my life. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could move on. It was time to heal, to let go, and to start fresh. It would be a long journey, but I was no longer carrying the weight of his lies with me. The truth had set me free, even if it had broken my heart in the process. The months after the trial were a blur. The weight of everything that had happened, the way my life had completely shifted, was almost too much to process. For the first time, I had to learn what it meant to live without the man who had been my whole world. The house felt empty. There were so many reminders of him, of the life we had once built. But with each passing day, I was slowly able to find some semblance of peace. I kept myself busy, work, friends, therapy. It was all part of the healing process. What surprised me, though, was the way people looked at me now. Some were sympathetic, others distant, as if I carried the shame of what he had done. I hated that feeling. I didn't want to be defined by him, by his actions, or by the mess he left in his wake. I had done the right thing. I had exposed him, but somehow I felt like I was still being judged, as if I were complicit in his crime just because I had been married to him. I started volunteering at a different charity, one that truly made a difference in people's lives. I threw myself into helping others, hoping it would help me heal as well. It wasn't easy, and at times I felt like I was living a double life, one where I was working hard to rebuild my life, while the other was still haunted by the ghosts of the past. But I couldn't let those shadows hold me back. I had to keep moving forward. One day, I received a letter from someone I hadn't expected to hear from, one of the donors who had been deceived by my husband's charity. The letter was filled with gratitude. They thanked me for exposing the truth, for giving them a chance to see the reality behind the facade. It was a humbling moment, and it made me realize that even though my world had been turned upside down, I had still made a difference. In some small way, I had helped right a wrong. The small victories, the loneliness crept in. I still had moments of doubt, moments where I missed the life I thought I was supposed to have. I had dreamed of growing old with my husband, of building a family, of making a difference together. But now, I was left with nothing but shattered dreams and a fractured sense of self. One day, as I sat on the porch sipping my coffee, I got a call from an old friend. We hadn't spoken in years, but somehow, she knew everything that had happened. She told me that she had been following the case and that she admired my strength through it all. Her words brought a tear to my eye. I didn't feel strong. I felt broken. But hearing her words of support reminded me that I wasn't alone. There were still people who cared, people who believed in me. The more I connected with others, the more I realized how much I had been hiding from myself. I had spent so long trying to keep up appearances, trying to be the perfect wife, the perfect woman. But now, I was learning to be real with myself. I was learning to embrace the person I was becoming. Someone who had survived, who had made mistakes but also learned from them. Someone who was ready to build a future, even if that future was uncertain. And then, something unexpected happened. I met someone. He was kind, genuine, and completely different from my husband in every way. At first, I hesitated. I wasn't sure if I was ready to trust again, or if I even wanted to. But he didn't rush me. He took his time, allowing me to heal at my own pace. Slowly, I began to open up, not just to him, but to the idea of love again. It wasn't easy. Trusting someone after everything I had been through was daunting. But for the first time in a long while, I began to feel hope. My journey to healing wasn't linear. There were days when I felt like I had it all together, and then there were days when I felt like I was drowning in the past. But I had learned to give myself grace, to allow myself the space to feel and to process everything. The guilt, the shame, and the heartbreak. It wasn't something that would go away overnight. But with each step, I moved closer to reclaiming my life. One afternoon, I received a phone call from a lawyer. It was a call I had been waiting for, the final confirmation that my divorce from my husband was official. The legal battle had been long and draining, but now it was over. I was free. The relief that washed over me was overwhelming. It was as if a heavy weight had been lifted from my shoulders, and for the first time in a long time, I could breathe again. But even though the legalities were behind me, the emotional scars remained. I knew it would take time to fully heal, but I was no longer burdened by the constant reminder of my past. I was starting to carve out a new future for myself, one that wasn't defined by the mistakes of others. I continued to focus on the charity work that had become so important to me. I helped those who truly needed it, not for recognition or validation, but because I believed in it. I believed in the goodness of people, and I knew that despite the darkness I had experienced, there was still light in the world. As the months turned into a year, I found myself growing stronger. The memories of my husband's betrayal were still there, but they no longer held the same power over me. I was learning to live for myself again, to build a future that was mine and mine alone. I had made peace with my past. The scars would never disappear, but they were no longer something that defined me. I was more than what had happened to me. I was a woman who had overcome, who had faced her fears, and who had fought for justice, no matter the cost. And then, one day, as I was walking down the street, I saw him, my ex-husband. He was standing across the street, looking at me. I felt a mix of emotions, anger, sadness, and a strange sense of detachment. For a moment, I wondered what he was thinking. Did he feel any remorse for what he had done? Did he regret the life he had chosen? But as I stood there, looking at him, I realized something important. I didn't need his answers anymore. I didn't need his approval. I didn't need anything from him. I had finally let go. And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly free. I walked on, my head held high. There was so much waiting for me in the future, so much I still wanted to do. I wasn't defined by my past anymore. I was defined by the woman I had become. A woman who had learned to trust herself again. A woman who had rediscovered her strength, her courage, and her heart. The weeks after seeing my ex-husband were filled with an unexpected calm. It was as if the confrontation I'd feared for so long had already happened, even though it had been silent. Seeing him again didn't stir up the panic I'd anticipated. Instead, it helped me realize just how much I had changed. I wasn't the same woman I had been when we first met. I wasn't the same woman who had blindly believed in his lies. The person I was now had strength and resilience. The pieces of me that had been broken were slowly coming back together, and they were stronger than before. I found myself enjoying the simple things again. Long walks through the park, reading books I had put off for years, and spending time with friends who had stuck by me through everything. They had seen me at my lowest, but now they saw me rising again. The conversations were different. No more awkward silences or pity. They spoke to me with a sense of admiration. I realized that I had inspired them in some way, by surviving, by not giving up. One evening, I went to dinner with a few friends, and we laughed so much I forgot about the dark times that had once consumed me. It was the first time in ages that I had felt truly happy. In those moments, I wasn't a victim of a scam, or the ex-wife of a criminal. I was just me, flawed, but whole. It was then that I realized that I wasn't running away from my past anymore. I had stopped looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next wave of chaos. Instead, I was moving forward, making decisions for myself, building the life I had always dreamed of. It wasn't easy, but it was mine. My new life didn't happen overnight. Each day was a small victory, a step forward. I wasn't perfect. I still had moments of doubt, of sadness. I had to remind myself that healing wasn't linear. There were still days when I felt the sting of betrayal, still days when I missed the man I thought I had married. But those days became fewer and fewer. I found solace in the routine. Work was challenging, but it gave me a purpose. Volunteering at the new charity was fulfilling. It felt like I was finally contributing to something positive. I had learned to surround myself with people who lifted me up, who believed in me, and who saw my worth. I realized that the love and support I had been seeking from others all my life had to come from within. It was up to me to believe in myself before anyone else could. One afternoon, a colleague at work asked me how I was doing, and I found myself answering without hesitation. "I'm good," I said. "I'm really good." It felt like the first honest answer I had given in a long time. I was no longer pretending. I wasn't hiding behind a mask of sadness or guilt. I was living my truth, and it was liberating. But the most unexpected part of my healing came in the form of a relationship I hadn't seen coming. Slowly, with time and patience, I began to fall for someone new. He was gentle, patient, and had no hidden agenda. He didn't try to fix me. He simply accepted me for who I was. It wasn't a whirlwind romance. It was calm, steady, and exactly what I needed. I found myself smiling more than I had in years, looking forward to the future instead of fearing it. I wasn't afraid of love anymore. As the months passed, my ex-husband's trial continued to unfold. The media attention gradually faded, but the impact of his crimes was still being felt by many. Some of his victims reached out to me, sharing their stories of how they had been affected by his actions. It was painful to hear, but it also reminded me of the importance of the truth. Even though I had been a part of the devastation he had caused, I had played a role in exposing it. That truth gave me strength. It gave me a sense of purpose. I wasn't powerless in the face of betrayal. I had fought back, and I had won. But I didn't need to constantly look back at the past to measure my progress. I didn't need to keep rehashing the story of what had happened. What mattered now was what I was doing in the present. How I was using my experiences to help others, to create a life of integrity and kindness, and to heal myself in the process. One evening, as I reflected on the journey I had taken, I realized something crucial. My worth had never been tied to the man I married, or the scam he had orchestrated. It had always been within me. I was always worthy of love, respect, and happiness. And no matter how hard I tried to deny it in the past, the truth was that I had always been strong enough to stand on my own. The future was waiting for me. It was still uncertain, but it was mine to shape, and I was ready to embrace it. It was a quiet Sunday morning when I received the news that my ex-husband had been sentenced. The judge's decision was harsh, but it was what he deserved. A part of me felt a small sense of closure, knowing that he was finally being held accountable for his actions. But another part of me felt indifferent. He no longer had any power over me. He was a chapter in my life that was now closed. I spent the day reflecting, walking through the park with a sense of peace. I had made it through the storm. The darkness no longer had a hold on me. I wasn't defined by the betrayal I had experienced. I wasn't defined by the mistakes I had made. I was defined by how I had chosen to rise above it all, to reclaim my life and my happiness. And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly free. As I sat on a bench, watching the sun set, I realized that the life I had always dreamed of, one filled with peace, love, and purpose, was no longer a distant fantasy. It was my reality, and I had built it, piece by piece, through my own strength, determination, and resilience. The journey wasn't over, but for the first time, I felt confident in the direction I was heading. I wasn't alone anymore. I had found myself again, and in doing so, I had found the freedom to live a life that was authentically mine. The seasons changed, and with each passing day, my life became more and more rooted in the reality I had fought so hard to create. I had rebuilt myself, but what surprised me the most was how much I had grown. I had discovered parts of myself I didn't even know existed: strength, resilience, and the ability to love again. But it wasn't just the healing process that had been transformative. It was the ability to find joy in the ordinary. My days had a rhythm now. I would wake up early, enjoy a peaceful cup of coffee while watching the sunrise, and go for a walk through the neighborhood. These moments were simple, yet they brought a profound sense of peace. The stress and anxiety that had once dominated my life had finally started to loosen their grip on me. But even with the serenity of the present, there were days when the memories of my past would rear their heads like unwelcome guests. There were times when I would find myself replaying moments, questioning everything I had thought I knew about love and trust. But instead of allowing those thoughts to consume me, I learned to acknowledge them and let them go. It was a process, one that didn't happen overnight, but it was progress. One evening, I was sitting in the quiet of my living room when my phone buzzed. It was a message from an old friend, someone I hadn't spoken to since before everything had fallen apart. She had heard about my journey and wanted to reconnect. I smiled as I read her message. It felt like a small piece of my old life resurfacing, a reminder that I wasn't alone in this world. I agreed to meet her the following week, eager to catch up. As the days passed, I continued to focus on my personal growth. I explored new hobbies, traveled to places I'd always wanted to see, and invested time in the relationships that had become my foundation. My friends were my support system, each one a piece of the puzzle that made me whole. But there was still something else I needed to address: my relationship with my own self-worth. Therapy had become a part of my weekly routine. It wasn't easy to confront the things I had buried deep within, but I knew it was essential to my healing. Each session brought new revelations, new layers of understanding about myself and the life I had lived with my ex-husband. I had been so caught up in his lies, in the narrative he had created for us, that I had lost sight of who I was. Through those therapy sessions, I began to reclaim my voice. I started setting boundaries, learning to say no when I needed to. I let go of the guilt that had weighed me down for so long, reminding myself that I was not responsible for his actions. I couldn't change the past, but I could shape my future. As my sense of self-worth grew, so did my confidence. I began to take risks, small ones at first, like speaking up more at work or joining new social events. And then, I found myself looking forward to the future, not with fear, but with excitement. There was so much more waiting for me beyond the shadow of my past. One afternoon, as I was browsing through some old photos, I came across a picture of my ex-husband and me on our honeymoon. We looked so happy, so full of hope. It was a reminder of how far I had come, how much I had changed, but it didn't hurt anymore. The past was just that, the past. I wasn't that woman anymore, and I was okay with that. Instead of lingering on the memories, I found myself planning new adventures. I was no longer shackled to the life I had once known. It was a strange but freeing sensation, knowing that I was the one in control now. The future wasn't uncertain. It was mine to create. It wasn't long before I began to see the fruits of my efforts. My relationships with friends had deepened, and I had begun to build new, meaningful connections. I wasn't looking for validation or approval anymore. I was confident in my own worth, and I was finally comfortable with who I was. I started traveling more, exploring the world in ways I had always dreamed of. It was liberating to step out of my comfort zone, to immerse myself in new cultures and experiences. There was a sense of freedom in it, a feeling of being unburdened, unafraid. I had learned to let go of expectations and embrace the spontaneity of life. One of the most rewarding aspects of my journey was the opportunity to give back. Through the charity work I had gotten involved with, I was able to touch lives in a meaningful way. I found myself working with women who had faced similar struggles, women who had been betrayed, hurt, and left broken. But what was most beautiful about it was watching them heal, seeing them regain their confidence and sense of self. I knew, deep down, that I was doing the right thing. I was no longer a passive observer in life. I was actively creating positive change. It was during one of these charity events that I met someone who changed everything. He was kind, patient, and had a warmth that immediately drew me in. There was no rush, no pressure, just a slow, natural connection that blossomed over time. I wasn't looking for a new relationship. I wasn't trying to fill the void that my ex-husband had left. But what I realized was that love, true love, wasn't about filling a gap. It was about two people coming together to build something beautiful. As the relationship with this new man developed, I found myself opening up in ways I hadn't thought possible. I shared parts of my past that I had kept hidden for so long, and he listened, without judgment, without pity. He simply accepted me for who I was, flaws and all. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was enough. But even as I opened up to him, I remained cautious. I had learned to guard my heart after everything I had been through. Trust wasn't something I gave lightly. I had to remind myself that love didn't mean losing myself, that it didn't require sacrifice. It was about mutual respect, understanding, and care. It was in this new chapter of my life that I realized the most important lesson of all. I didn't need someone else to complete me. I was already whole, and the love I was receiving, both from this man and from myself, was the final piece I had been searching for. With every passing day, I grew more certain of my path. The woman I had become was stronger, wiser, and more at peace with herself than ever before. The future held endless possibilities, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid to chase them. My ex-husband was a part of my past, a lesson in betrayal, but he no longer had the power to define me. I had taken the broken pieces of my life and rebuilt them into something better. And as I walked toward the future, hand in hand with someone who truly cared for me, I knew that I was finally living the life I deserved. It was a Saturday morning, and I found myself sitting at my favorite cafe, enjoying the warm sunlight that filtered through the windows. The world felt peaceful, and I could finally appreciate the quiet moments I had once taken for granted. Life had shifted in ways I never expected, and it had taken me down a path of self-discovery and healing that I could never have imagined before. As I sipped my coffee, I received a message that caught me off guard. It was from a former colleague, someone I had worked with before my marriage, someone who had always been supportive of my career. She asked if I would consider speaking at a women's empowerment event she was hosting. The invitation felt like an unexpected gift, an opportunity to share my story, to help others, and to stand in my own truth. At first, I hesitated. I wasn't sure if I was ready to revisit everything I had been through. But then, I remembered the women I had helped through the charity, the lives I had touched by sharing my experience. I realized that by opening up, I could help others find their way through their own struggles. It wasn't about reliving the pain. It was about showing that there was hope, that there was life beyond betrayal, beyond hurt. I agreed to speak at the event, and in the days that followed, I found myself preparing for it. I reflected on how far I had come, on the strength, resilience, and growth that had shaped me into the woman I was today. My heart swelled with gratitude as I realized that I had overcome the impossible, and now, I had the chance to share my journey with others. When the day of the event arrived, I stood in front of the crowd with my heart racing. It was an unfamiliar feeling, yet I felt ready. I shared my story, how I had been deceived, how my life had been shattered, and how, step by step, I had rebuilt it. The room was silent as I spoke, and I could see the women in the audience nodding, some even wiping away tears. In that moment, I realized that I wasn't just speaking for myself. I was speaking for every woman who had ever been made to feel small, for every woman who had been hurt, and for every woman who had dared to rise again. The event was a turning point for me. It wasn't just about sharing my past or finding validation. It was about empowerment. I left the stage that day with a sense of fulfillment I hadn't known I was missing. The feedback from the women who attended was overwhelmingly positive, and many reached out to thank me for opening up. Some told me that hearing my story had given them the courage to leave toxic relationships, to rebuild their lives, and to trust again. I was humbled. I hadn't realized the impact my story could have on others. But as I received these messages of gratitude, I knew I had done the right thing by sharing my truth. It was not about playing the victim. It was about showing the world that there was power in reclaiming your life, that no matter how many times we are knocked down, we can always rise again. Over the next few months, I continued to speak at similar events, growing more comfortable with my voice, with the idea of standing up for what I believed in. And with each speech, I felt more confident in my own skin. I wasn't afraid to be vulnerable anymore. I wasn't afraid to show the world my scars, because they were a part of me. They were a part of my journey, and they had made me who I was today. But even as I found my purpose in helping others, I knew there was still more work to do. There was always more to learn, more to give, and more ways to grow. I was committed to continuing my own personal development, to always being open to new experiences, and to helping others whenever I could. By now, I had become an advocate for survivors of emotional abuse and financial scams. I worked closely with organizations that helped victims rebuild their lives, providing resources and support for those who were starting over, just like I had. I didn't just talk about healing, I lived it. Every day, I woke up with the intention of making a positive impact in the world. And then one evening, as I was working on a new initiative with a group of survivors, I received an unexpected phone call. It was from the same lawyer who had been involved in my divorce. She told me that my ex-husband had reached out, asking if I would be willing to meet with him. My first instinct was to say no. He had betrayed me, lied to me, and caused unimaginable harm. I had no interest in hearing from him, but there was something in her voice that made me pause. She told me that he had expressed regret for his actions, that he had acknowledged the damage he had caused. She also mentioned that he had been seeking counseling and had made significant efforts to make amends. He wanted to apologize, to try to atone for what he had done. I sat with that for a long time, unsure of how to respond. A part of me wanted to meet with him, to get the closure I had never received. But another part of me knew that I didn't need his apology to move forward. I had already done the hard work of healing. I had already reclaimed my life. The past was behind me. After much contemplation, I decided to decline the offer. I had already forgiven him in my heart, not for his sake, but for my own. I didn't need closure from him. I had found my own peace. The chapter with him was closed, and it was time to move forward, fully and completely. As the years went by, I continued to grow, both personally and professionally. My work with survivors flourished, and I became more involved in advocacy for women's rights, focusing on issues of financial abuse and deception. My voice became a powerful tool for change, and I was grateful every day that I had found my purpose in helping others. But my personal life was just as fulfilling. My relationship with the man I had met after my divorce continued to deepen. It wasn't rushed, but it was real. We took our time to build something solid, founded on trust, respect, and mutual understanding. It was refreshing to be with someone who valued me, who never pressured me to be anything other than myself. We traveled together, shared dreams, and laughed more than I thought possible. I realized that love, when it was healthy and genuine, wasn't something that took away from who you were. It added to you. It made you better. And for the first time, I was able to fully embrace love without fear. Looking back on everything I had been through, the lies, the betrayal, the heartbreak, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. I had taken the worst parts of my life and transformed them into something beautiful. I had found my voice, my strength, and my purpose. And as I looked ahead to the future, I knew that there was nothing I couldn't face. My story wasn't defined by my ex-husband's actions or the pain he caused me. It was defined by my resilience, my ability to heal, and my commitment to living an authentic life. The journey had been long, but it had been worth it. And with each new day, I was more certain that I was exactly where I was meant to be. I was finally free. As the years passed, I found myself reflecting often on how far I had come. The woman I was now felt like an entirely different person from the one who had first discovered my ex-husband's betrayal. It wasn't just the external changes in my life that amazed me. It was the inner transformation. I had been forced to rebuild my life from the ground up, and in the process, I had learned to trust myself again. I had learned to believe in my own strength and resilience, and in doing so, I had come to see just how much power we have when we take control of our own narratives. One quiet evening, as I sat at home writing in my journal, a thought occurred to me. I had built a new life, but I had also discovered a new sense of purpose. It wasn't enough to just survive anymore. I wanted to thrive. I wanted to keep pushing boundaries, exploring new opportunities, and making a difference in the lives of others. I had been invited to give another speech, this time at a national conference on financial literacy and empowerment for women. It was an opportunity to speak to an even wider audience, to share my story and the lessons I had learned along the way. I had never been one to shy away from sharing the truth, but this felt different. It felt like the culmination of everything I had worked for, the chance to inspire, to teach, and to help others find their own path to healing and empowerment. As the date of the conference drew closer, I found myself preparing with a sense of excitement that had eluded me in the past. I wasn't speaking out of a need for closure or validation. I was speaking because I knew I had something important to say. I knew that my experience could resonate with others who had felt trapped by their pasts, by their mistakes, or by the lies they had been told. And I wanted them to know that there was always hope. The night before my speech, I sat in my hotel room, reflecting on everything that had led me to this moment. I thought about the people who had supported me, the women I had met along the way who had inspired me to keep going. I thought about the painful lessons, the mistakes, and the heartbreak. And I realized that those experiences had shaped me into the woman I had become. A woman who was not afraid to stand tall, to speak her truth, and to live a life that was hers and hers alone. The conference was a success, beyond anything I could have imagined. As I took the stage, I looked out at the sea of faces before me, women from all walks of life, each one with her own story, her own struggles, and her own dreams. I felt an overwhelming sense of connection, knowing that we were all united by our shared experiences and our collective desire for change. My speech went off without a hitch. I spoke about the importance of financial independence, about how we should never let anyone dictate our worth or our path in life. I shared how my ex-husband's scam had not only destroyed my trust, but had also threatened my financial security. And I talked about how I had fought to regain control over my life, how I had taken the lessons from that painful chapter and used them to help others. The audience was captivated. I could see the nods of understanding, the glimmers of hope in their eyes. After my speech, women came up to me in droves, thanking me for my words. They told me how they, too, had been manipulated, betrayed, or taken advantage of. They thanked me for showing them that they didn't have to remain trapped in their circumstances, that there was always a way forward. It was in those moments, as I spoke to these women, that I realized just how much I had grown. I wasn't just a survivor anymore. I was a warrior, a teacher, a mentor. I had turned my pain into purpose, and it was through that purpose that I had found my own healing. That night, as I lay in bed reflecting on everything that had transpired, I felt a deep sense of peace. I had done what I set out to do. I had shared my truth, helped others, and had continued to live a life of integrity. As the months went on, I found that my role in the world was evolving. I was no longer just a voice for victims of scams or emotional abuse. I had become a leader in the fight for women's financial independence. I partnered with organizations to create educational programs, workshops, and online resources designed to help women gain financial literacy and take control of their own futures. Through this work, I was able to reach women who were struggling in silence, who had been made to feel small or incapable. My mission was clear: to empower women to make informed financial decisions, to teach them how to recognize the signs of financial abuse, and to help them understand that they were worthy of financial security and freedom. I also began writing a book. My book. It was a memoir, yes, but it was also a guide to overcoming betrayal, reclaiming your power, and rebuilding your life. The writing process was cathartic, allowing me to go deeper into my own healing journey, while also offering practical advice to those who might be going through similar struggles. I knew that this book could be the lifeline for someone else, just as others' stories had been a lifeline for me. In all of this, I felt a sense of fulfillment that was unlike anything I had ever known. I had created a life that was truly mine, one that was grounded in purpose and guided by the desire to make a difference. My past no longer had a hold on me. I was no longer defined by the pain or betrayal of my marriage. Instead, I was defined by the strength I had cultivated, the wisdom I had gained, and the impact I was making in the world. But the most beautiful part of this new chapter was the love I had found. The man I had been building a relationship with had become my rock. He supported me in everything I did, encouraged my dreams, and shared my passion for helping others. We were partners, not just in love, but in life. I had never believed that a love so pure, so genuine, could exist after everything I had been through, but with him, I knew that love could be healing, nurturing, and safe. The journey had been long, and at times it had been difficult, but as I sat in the quiet of my home one evening, I realized how far I had come. I had walked through the fire and come out the other side, stronger, wiser, and more at peace with myself than ever before. I had learned that healing wasn't a destination, it was a lifelong process. But through every challenge, I had discovered the beauty of resilience, the importance of self-love, and the power of finding your own voice. I had spent so many years seeking approval, validation, and love from others. But now, I realized that the most important love I could ever have was the love I gave myself. It was only through accepting myself, flaws and all, that I had been able to create a life that was full of meaning and joy. My ex-husband was still a part of my past, but he no longer had any power over me. I had learned to forgive him, not for him, but for me. I had let go of the bitterness and resentment that had once consumed me. I had taken the lessons from our relationship and used them to become a better version of myself. As I looked to the future, I knew that whatever came next, I was ready. I was equipped with the tools, the mindset, and the love that I needed to continue on this path of growth, self-discovery, and empowerment. The life I had once dreamed of, one of peace, purpose, and happiness, was no longer a distant hope. It was my reality, and I was living it every single day. Life had finally settled into a rhythm that felt right. It was strange to look back on everything, the emotional storms, the uncertainty, the brokenness, and to realize that it was all part of my journey. Each chapter, each challenge, had led me to this moment, and I had come out stronger for it. I continued to speak at events and give workshops, always reminding women of the importance of their financial independence, their voice, and their strength. It wasn't just about surviving, it was about thriving. I was seeing real change. Women were gaining confidence, learning how to take control of their finances, and finding the courage to leave situations that didn't serve them. Through all this, my relationship with the man who had supported me throughout my healing continued to grow. He was patient, understanding, and his love was unwavering. I felt safe with him, something I had never thought I would experience again. He accepted me, scars and all, and that was something I'd come to realize was rare. This love wasn't about fixing each other or completing one another. It was about supporting each other's individual journeys, growing together, and sharing in each other's dreams. We had talked about taking the next step, building a future together. It felt like a natural progression, but I wasn't rushing into anything. I was still learning what it meant to fully trust, to let my guard down, but with him, I felt ready. Ready to build a partnership that was rooted in equality, trust, and love. One quiet evening, while we were cooking dinner together, I looked at him, and it was like I saw him for the first time. Really saw him. Not as someone who was filling the space left by my past pain, but as someone who had come into my life at the right time. Someone who had shown me that love could be different, better. He was the kind of man I had always hoped existed, the kind who saw me, supported me, and encouraged me to be the best version of myself. It wasn't a fairy tale. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and that was enough. The more I reflected on my life, the more I realized that I had been given the gift of perspective. I had spent so many years running from my pain, trying to ignore it, pretending it didn't exist. But once I embraced it, once I allowed myself to feel it and learn from it, that's when my life truly began. I started to notice how much of my energy had once been tied up in fighting my past. I had been so focused on surviving that I had forgotten to live. But now, with every passing day, I was learning how to truly live. I was more present, more aware, and more grateful for the small moments. Whether it was laughing with my partner, spending time with friends, or simply enjoying a quiet morning with a cup of tea, I learned that life wasn't about grand achievements. It was about finding joy in the everyday. That wasn't to say there weren't still challenges. Life always has a way of testing us, and I was no exception. But I now faced those challenges with a strength and calm that I hadn't known I was capable of before. I no longer felt like a victim of circumstance. I was in control of my life, my choices, and my destiny. There was still work to be done in the world. The issues I cared about, the need for financial literacy, emotional well-being, and women's empowerment, were ongoing. But I had learned that I could make a difference. My voice could spark change. I didn't need to have all the answers, but I could continue to ask the questions and create the conversations that needed to happen. And, perhaps most importantly, I had learned that healing was not linear. It wasn't a one-time event that ended when you fixed yourself. Healing was ongoing, and that was okay. Every day, I continued to heal, to grow, and to embrace the life I was creating. Then, one day, as I sat down to write in my journal, I found myself contemplating something I had never allowed myself to consider before: the possibility of fully letting go of the past. It wasn't that I was holding on to grudges or resentments. I had long forgiven my ex-husband, and the anger I once harbored had faded into the distance. But I had always carried the weight of what he had done, the scars from the betrayal, as if they were a part of me. But now, as I reflected on all I had achieved, on how far I had come, it hit me. I no longer needed to carry that weight. It was time to fully release the past. My journey had led me to this moment, and I was no longer bound by it. I had rebuilt my life piece by piece, and now I could truly let go. It wasn't an easy decision. For years, I had held onto the narrative of victimhood, of the woman who had been deceived, lied to, and betrayed. But now, I realized that wasn't who I was anymore. That was a part of my story, yes, but it was no longer my identity. I had become so much more than the pain I had endured, and it was time to step into that. That night, as I closed my journal, I felt a sense of peace that was deep and profound. I didn't need closure from my past. I had already found it within myself. I had made peace with my journey, and I was ready to move forward without the baggage that had once weighed me down. I think back to the day I discovered my ex-husband's secret scam, how it felt like the ground had been ripped out from beneath me. I was lost, broken, and utterly betrayed. But now, all these years later, I look at everything I have accomplished, the women I've helped, the work I've done, the life I've built, and I can say with certainty that I wouldn't change a thing. The pain and heartbreak, the struggles, and the setbacks, they all led me to where I am today. I am stronger, more resilient, and more capable than I ever thought possible. And I've come to understand something crucial. We are not defined by our circumstances, our mistakes, or the people who hurt us. We are defined by how we rise from those challenges, how we choose to move forward. The journey is never easy, and I don't believe it ever truly ends. Life will continue to throw obstacles our way. But what I've learned is that we have the power to shape our own paths, to create the lives we want, regardless of where we've been or what we've faced. And as I look forward to the future, I do so with hope and excitement. I've taken the lessons from my past and used them to create something beautiful. And I know that whatever comes next, I will face it with courage, with grace, and with the unshakable knowledge that I am enough. The best chapters of my story are still yet to come. The years seemed to fly by, and as the months passed, I began to see the ripple effects of the work I had started. The women I'd helped, the ones who had shared their stories with me, were growing. Some of them had started their own businesses, others were beginning to take charge of their financial futures. Every conversation, every new interaction felt like a thread in the tapestry of my healing, and their healing too. One of the most profound realizations I had was that when you choose to give of yourself, to help others, to share your lessons, the impact is far greater than you could ever imagine. I never set out to be a mentor, but that's exactly what I had become. And through this, I discovered a new kind of fulfillment. There was a satisfaction that came from seeing other women stand tall and walk their own path with confidence. I continued with my speaking engagements, but the nature of my message had evolved. What once began as a cautionary tale had turned into an inspiring narrative about empowerment, independence, and self-worth. I no longer viewed myself as a victim. I had become a beacon for others, showing them that it wasn't the betrayal that defined us, It was how we chose to rise after it. Even with all the good things happening, there were still moments when I would get lost in my thoughts, remembering the pain, the anger, and the heartbreak of that chapter of my life. There were days when I would pause and ask myself, did I really make the right choice by leaving him? Was I too quick to walk away? But every time I would get caught in that mental loop, I would remind myself of how far I had come, how much I had grown. I was not the same woman I had been when I was married. I was now someone who knew her worth and was unwilling to settle for anything less than the life she deserved. As the seasons changed, so did the way I looked at relationships. After everything I had been through, I had learned to be cautious, not just with others, but with myself. I had allowed someone else's actions to shape so much of my life for far too long. The freedom that came from taking back control over my own narrative was a gift I never wanted to lose. I thought often of my partner, the man who had patiently walked alongside me during my journey. Our relationship was grounded in trust and mutual respect. We both knew that love was a partnership, not an ownership. And that had been one of the greatest lessons I had learned through my ordeal with my ex-husband. My partner wasn't the answer to all of my pain, and I wasn't his. We were two whole individuals coming together, sharing our experiences, supporting each other, but never looking to fix or complete one another. That was the healthiest foundation I had ever built for a relationship, and I was proud of it. As we started talking more seriously about our future, I felt a wave of excitement for what was to come. I was no longer afraid of commitment. I was ready, but this time, I wasn't rushing in. I knew what I wanted, and I knew the importance of not losing myself in someone else. Love had to be equal, reciprocal, and, above all, honest. I felt secure in the knowledge that this was the kind of relationship I deserved. The thought of blending our lives together, traveling, sharing dreams, and building memories filled me with warmth. It wasn't about perfection, but about authenticity, about embracing both our strengths and flaws. Then, one day, I received a letter from a woman I had never met. Her name was Emma, and her words hit me like a wave of emotion. She had read about my story and had been following my journey through social media. In her letter, she detailed how her life had mirrored mine in many ways. She had been deceived by a man she thought she could trust, who used her in the same way my ex-husband had used me. But Emma's story didn't end in defeat. She had found my speeches and articles on financial independence, and it had sparked something inside her. She had taken the lessons I had shared and used them to turn her life around. Emma was now working on building her own business and had regained her financial stability. She credited me with helping her find the courage to walk away from an abusive situation that had nearly destroyed her. Reading her letter brought tears to my eyes. To know that my story had played a part in someone else's healing was beyond anything I had ever imagined. It made all the struggles, all the pain, worth it. The letter was a reminder of why I had chosen to speak out, why I had chosen to share my journey with the world. It wasn't just for me. It was for women like Emma, who needed to hear that there was hope, that they too could rise above their circumstances. As I closed the letter, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. I had turned my pain into something beautiful, a way to help others find their own strength and resilience. And that, to me, was the most rewarding thing I could ever accomplish. My journey wasn't just about discovering my own strength. It was about seeing the ripple effect that kindness, support, and courage could have. I was only one woman, but by sharing my story, by speaking out, I had connected with so many others. The community I had built, both in person and online, was thriving, and I felt so deeply fulfilled in my role within it. I had learned to see my struggles not as setbacks, but as lessons. The moments of heartbreak, the betrayals, and the difficulties. Each one had taught me something vital about myself. I was not afraid to face the past, because I knew that it didn't define me. I defined myself. There were still moments when the shadows of the past would creep in, when I would question if I had truly healed. But those moments became fewer and fewer. The love and support I had around me, along with the work I was doing to help others, had created a life that was more than I had ever dreamed. Every time I spoke to someone who had been through something similar, I remembered how far I had come. Every conversation, every piece of advice I gave, reminded me that healing wasn't about forgetting. It was about learning, growing, and using what we had learned to shape the lives we wanted. I had finally embraced the woman I had become, and I was proud of her. The road had been long, but every step had been worth it. And now, with every new day, I was ready to face whatever came next, knowing that I had the power to create the future I wanted. As the years continued to unfold, I began to feel more and more at peace with my life. The past no longer had a grip on me, and my future, once shrouded in uncertainty, now stretched out before me with endless possibilities. I had rebuilt everything: my self-esteem, my career, my relationships, and I was no longer afraid of what the future might hold. I was confident in the decisions I had made, and I was grateful for the lessons that had shaped me. One thing that surprised me, however, was how much my definition of success had changed. When I was younger, I thought success was all about career achievements, wealth, and outward accomplishments. But now, I understood that true success was about inner peace, meaningful relationships, and the ability to give back. It wasn't about the things I had, but the person I had become and the positive impact I was making in the world. I had started a foundation to continue my work with women, especially those who had fallen victim to financial abuse or had been misled by deceptive partners. The foundation was more than just a charity. It was a support system, a community where women could come together to heal, to share, and to grow. I could see the difference it was making, and that brought me a sense of fulfillment I had never known before. The work was exhausting at times, but it was rewarding beyond measure. There were days when I felt overwhelmed by the weight of the responsibility, but those were the days when I reminded myself of why I had started this journey in the first place. The smiles on the faces of the women who had turned their lives around, the letters of gratitude, and the success stories were what kept me going. I had created something powerful. It was a legacy that would outlive me, and that was enough. One day, while I was sitting in my office reviewing documents for the foundation, I received an unexpected message. It was from my ex-husband. His words were simple: "I know I've made mistakes. I've hurt you, and I'm sorry for that." The message caught me off guard. After all these years, why now? What had prompted him to reach out? At first, I didn't know how to feel. I had spent so much time healing, building a life that was free from his influence, that I hadn't expected to hear from him again. His apology, though long overdue, did nothing to change the past. It didn't erase the hurt or the betrayal, but as I read his words, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened. I had moved on. I had learned to forgive, not for him, but for my own peace of mind. His apology, while appreciated, didn't have the power to undo the past or alter the trajectory of my life. The years I had spent rebuilding had already shown me that I didn't need his approval or validation to be whole. I decided not to respond right away. I needed time to process my emotions and decide what I wanted from this moment. Was I ready to open that door again, or had I closed it for good? But as I thought about it, I realized that this message, however unexpected, was yet another step in my healing process. It wasn't about reconciliation or rehashing the past. It was about acknowledging how far I had come and recognizing that I had nothing left to prove. I had already let go. Time passed, and my decision not to respond to my ex-husband's message stood. I felt no urge to reach out to him, no desire to open old wounds. His apology didn't change my journey. It only served as a reminder of how much I had healed. With that chapter truly closed, I could focus entirely on the life I was living now. My foundation continued to grow, and with every new woman who reached out for help, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. I had built something beautiful out of the ashes of my past, and that, I knew, was the most important thing. Through all of this, I had come to understand that closure doesn't always come in the form we expect. Sometimes, it comes through acceptance, through living a life that reflects your values, and through knowing that the pain you once carried no longer defines you. I had learned that forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. It meant no longer allowing the past to have control over my life. It meant creating a future filled with hope, peace, and love. The lessons I had learned along the way had shaped me into someone capable of finding joy in even the darkest moments. I had also come to realize that the journey of healing and growth was never truly done. It was an ongoing process, one that continued to evolve as I moved forward. Life had a way of teaching us new lessons, and I was ready to embrace whatever came next with open arms. And as I stood on the stage at yet another women's empowerment event, sharing my story, I was reminded once again of how far I had come. The woman who once felt broken and lost was now a beacon of strength and hope for others. It was a humbling thought, but it also filled me with pride. The past no longer had a hold on me, and the future, bright, uncertain, and full of possibilities, was mine to shape. I think back to the early days of my journey when I first discovered my husband's secret charity scam. At the time, everything seemed like a crushing blow. I couldn't see the light at the end of the tunnel, and I wondered if I would ever be able to overcome the heartache and betrayal. But now, looking at the woman I had become, I realized that I wouldn't change a single thing. The pain had taught me about resilience, about strength, about what truly mattered in life. It had forced me to confront the truth and to build a future that was all my own. The life I had now was one of my own making. It wasn't perfect, and it hadn't come without sacrifice, but it was real. I had learned to value myself, to honor my own worth, and to never again settle for less than I deserved. And while my story might have started in betrayal, it didn't end there. It ended with the knowledge that I had the power to create the life I wanted, to heal, to grow, and to thrive. Every challenge, every setback, had led me to this point, a place of peace, empowerment, and fulfillment. As I looked at the future ahead, I couldn't help but smile. The best chapters of my life were still yet to be written, and I was ready to turn the page. As the years went by, I continued to evolve, not just personally, but professionally. The foundation I had built was flourishing, and my work had expanded beyond anything I had initially imagined. I began to see the ripple effect in every city I visited, every woman I met. I was no longer just a survivor of my past. I was a changemaker. I had learned to trust myself completely. In my relationships, in my work, and in my future, I no longer second-guessed my instincts. I had the confidence to make decisions with clarity, to act with purpose, and to stand firm in my beliefs. It was liberating to realize how much power we have over our own lives when we choose to believe in ourselves. The foundation had become a force for good, and the more I poured myself into it, the more I saw the impact it had on the lives of countless women. Women were finding the strength to leave abusive relationships. They were starting their own businesses, taking control of their finances, and embracing their worth. I had created a space for empowerment, and I was watching it unfold before me. But despite all the success and the positive impact I had created, I knew there would always be work to do. I understood that true change takes time. It takes constant effort, and it takes a willingness to continue to challenge the status quo. One day, while reflecting on everything I had been through, I had an epiphany. I realized that every single challenge, every setback, had ultimately shaped me into someone who was capable of handling anything life threw my way. The pain of betrayal, the devastation of losing everything, had all served a higher purpose. It had prepared me for the life I was now living. In a strange way, I was grateful for the trials of my past. Without them, I wouldn't have the perspective I had now. I wouldn't have the deep appreciation for the quiet moments of peace. I wouldn't have the courage to speak out about the things that mattered. I wouldn't have the passion to help women who were struggling, who needed to hear that they too could rise above their circumstances. As I stood at the podium, delivering yet another speech, I realized that this work was my calling. It was the purpose I had been searching for. I wasn't just helping others, I was fulfilling my own journey. Every woman I helped was a testament to my growth. Every success story was a reflection of how far I had come. The audience was filled with women whose faces I didn't recognize, but whose struggles and dreams mirrored my own. And in that moment, I knew that this was my legacy, one of empowerment, resilience, and healing. The years kept rolling by, but with each passing day, I was more certain of one thing. I had created a life I could be proud of. It was a life built on the foundation of self-love, trust, and purpose. I no longer feared what might happen in the future because I knew I had the strength to handle it. I was grounded in who I was, and I was proud of the woman I had become. I no longer thought about my ex-husband or the betrayal that had once consumed my every thought. It no longer held any power over me. Instead, I focused on the future, the work I was doing, the people I was helping, and the love I was cultivating in my life. The man I had chosen to share my life with was by my side, supporting me in every new endeavor, and together, we created a home filled with laughter, warmth, and love. My journey had taken me from the darkest of places to the brightest of futures, and I knew that the most beautiful chapters of my life were still unfolding. I had found a peace that I never thought was possible, and I was finally living the life I had always deserved. And as I stood there, looking out at the horizon, I knew that no matter what came next, I was ready, because I had already faced the most difficult challenges, and I had survived. The story of my past was no longer my defining narrative. It was only the beginning of an incredible journey that was still unfolding. And now, I was in control. I had written my own ending, and it was a beautiful one. It was a warm spring afternoon when I received a call that would change everything once again. I had been at the office, reviewing applications for new mentorship opportunities for the foundation when my phone rang. The voice on the other end was familiar but distant. It was from an old colleague, someone I had worked with years ago before the foundation took off. She had good news. I know this might be a bit out of the blue, but there's something you need to hear. I've been in contact with a few people who have been doing extensive research into charitable organizations, and one of them has mentioned your foundation. They want to speak with you about a potential partnership, a big one. The words barely sank in before she continued. We're talking about a multi-million-dollar investment, new resources, a chance to reach more women and change lives on a larger scale. They want to help you expand in ways you never thought possible. I stood there, my heart racing. It was hard to take in at first. After everything I had gone through, after the long hours and struggles, someone was offering me a chance to push the foundation further. I couldn't help but feel a mix of disbelief and excitement. The path ahead was now brighter than ever before, and this opportunity was the next step in ensuring that my work continued to grow, impacting more and more lives. I had come so far, from a woman who had lost everything to someone who now had the chance to offer everything to others. This partnership could mean more programs, more outreach, and more women empowered to take control of their own futures. After weeks of negotiations and countless meetings, we had finalized the deal. The foundation was now receiving more funding and support than ever before. The expansion was underway, but with it came more responsibility, more pressure, and a heightened sense of accountability. I had learned over the years that success wasn't about just the outcome. It was about managing what came with it. And as much as the prospect of scaling the foundation excited me, I knew there was a fine line between growth and losing sight of why I had started in the first place. This was about making a real difference. It was about staying grounded, remembering the women who had trusted me with their stories, their pain, and their hopes. Every step forward had to stay true to the mission that had been my driving force all these years. But as I watched my team grow, as I saw new volunteers and experts join the cause, I felt a sense of accomplishment that was hard to put into words. My work was truly making an impact, and I was no longer just trying to heal myself. I was helping others find the same healing, the same strength, and the same courage to rebuild their lives. I also noticed something I hadn't expected. As the foundation grew, I began to see old patterns of fear creeping in. There was a part of me that feared losing touch with what truly mattered, the people, the personal connections. But I quickly reminded myself that the foundation wasn't about me. It was about the women we served, the stories we were helping rewrite. I made it a point to stay connected with those who needed help most, to be present in the lives of those who reached out to us for support. My role had evolved into more than just the face of the foundation. I became a listener, a mentor, a guide for others who were finding their own paths to independence. I reminded myself that the heart of the foundation and of my work was about human connection, not just financial success or scale. There were difficult days, of course. The pressure to keep up with the expanding responsibilities could be overwhelming. But I had learned how to balance ambition with compassion, how to keep my own well-being in mind while also giving to others. I knew when to delegate, when to take a break, and when to stand firm in my vision for the future. By the time we had reached our 10-year anniversary, I looked back at everything with a sense of awe. What started as a small, personal mission had grown into an organization that had transformed the lives of thousands. The impact we had made was beyond anything I could have ever imagined. The ripple effect of our work had spread far and wide, and there was still so much more to do. The foundation had become a model of empowerment, not just for women, but for communities, for families. And with every new initiative we launched, I felt the weight of the responsibility in the best possible way. It was a constant reminder that change doesn't happen overnight. It's built, step by step, through dedication and unwavering commitment. I knew there would be challenges ahead, but I also knew I had the strength to face them. The woman who had once been betrayed and deceived had transformed into a force for good in the world. And every day I woke up, I was reminded of how far I had come, of the woman I had become, and of the legacy I was creating for future generations. Looking at my life now, I couldn't help but reflect on how everything had unfolded. The story of my past, the betrayals, the heartbreak, had all led me to this place. But the woman I was now was no longer defined by the pain of yesterday. I had found peace, healing, and purpose in ways I never thought possible. What I had learned most was that even in the face of betrayal, of broken trust, there was always a way forward. I had learned to trust myself again, to find strength in my own voice, and to turn my pain into purpose. The journey wasn't easy, but it had been worth it. The legacy I was building wasn't just about my work or the foundation. It was about the women I helped, the lives I touched, and the courage it took to rise above everything that tried to break me. I had found my true calling, and I was living it every single day. And as I stood at the podium one last time to give my final speech as the head of the foundation, I couldn't help but smile. My story had come full circle. The journey that had once been defined by betrayal had now become one of triumph. And as I looked out into the audience, I knew that the most beautiful chapters were still ahead. This was just the beginning, and I was ready for whatever came next.